Good afternoon. Welcome to the October 21st Government Operations Committee. Welcome everybody. Can we get a motion to approve our September 16th meeting minutes?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Moving on to the course of the meeting. Today we have two continuing conversations on the land bank and the BACs, and hand it over to Andrew Saunders.
Sure. Melinda Lord is going to take us on a little bit of a deeper dive on the Land Bank Authority. We've had some success in nailing down some of those early documents from the Athens Land Bank Authority, a little bit more on history. She'll also talk about opportunities for both this committee and something that HCD is going to be participating in. So one of the things that's going to be asked of you today is, and this was covered a little bit with the help of the attorney's office last time, what questions do you have as you kind of imagine setting up the Land Bank Authority, and even how you might imagine it different than your traditional land bank authorities? Those staff will take back and have addressed you through this educational opportunity or by the next GSE meeting. Last word, Melinda does have a appointment coming up, so she's going to leave after this topic. I just wanted to help clarify that. So Melinda,
I'm sorry.
yeah, if you will, go ahead and take us through a little bit what you got.
Sure. So first slide, we'll get started on the state laws that govern the framework for Land Bank Authority. So you have the number of members. It stipulates that they need to be anywhere from 5 to 11. It has to be odd. And then we'll talk about this forward, but we currently have 5 members. It also talks about who can be a part of the board for a land bank authority. So it can be any governing agent. So it could be a commissioner. It could be a staff member that works for ACC Gov. Those are just 2 examples of who could be sitting on your active land bank. The third is your executive director. You can employ an executive director, and you will see that most land bank authorities do have staff. Most of them all have an executive director, but they also usually have their own counsel or legal staff. Even if they're not employed specifically to the land bank, they have an agreement, an MOU in place, so that they can get that legal assistance there. They also can have technical experts. They can have agents, employees, but essentially you have the authority to put people in place to be employed for a land bank. It does not have to be all volunteer. Most of them are not.
So who would fund that? Would it be funded through the government, or would we have to?
You'd have to seed it through the government. So probably for the first 3 years, I would say you need to consider that funding that's already available needs to be used to float a position or 2. And then once they actually start selling properties and they start generating their own revenue, then that should supplant at least the majority of any salary money that's being used by. But you would have to be prepared to float for at least 2 to 3 years in the beginning. Also, here's the fun part of legal language. This is where we wrangle with this all the time. So at first it said you have no authority, the land bank has no authority to lend money. Then it says, but you do actually. If it's federal, state, or local funding, then it can be administered in the form of a loan to a non-governmental entity, as long as it's consistently used for the purpose that's permitted by the land.
And so one of the reasons why we highlight that is I think we'll continue to dive deeper. We've seen some different programs other land banks have offered, but specific to the affordable housing investment strategies that you all designated in the FY25 budget, we really want clarification on how much, if any, of that heavy lifting can the Land Bank Authority do?
I appreciate you making that comment. I was thinking that, but then I was like, maybe it's too early. So thank you for making that comment.
That money that we set aside could it be part of the seed money?
Yes.
You need to start that.
Yes. Yeah, so the $5 million, we already have pilot funds that are in there, and there's some remaining inclusionary zone money. Any of that money could be used for seed money. And then finally, we look at the fact that the Land Bank Authority does not have the authority to do eminent domain. That is one of their restrictions. They are allowed to acquire real property. They're also allowed to dispose of Athens-Clarke County owned properties and properties that they are able to acquire with their funding. So they're able to also manage that, keep it up to date, do all nice, fun things with the land that they have. They are also able to use it for many different purposes. They can serve for many different purposes, and one of them is specifically for affordable housing activities.
Question.
Madam.
So could land bank property be swapped? Are property swaps allowed? Say the government owns some money that may not be suitable for these purposes, but a private entity might? Is that?
In those cases, they would usually, depending upon what it is. So if they wanted to use disposition to give it to a nonprofit developer, then it could be done in that purpose. But if you want to get rid of a property to make revenue, then they could sell it and then turn around and use that money to acquire a property that's better for development and then do with it.
But what if you have a somewhat benevolent developer who has property that may be worth more than the property in the land bank?
I can speak to that a little bit. Specific to the land bank, I think we'll note this question and give the attorney's office time to review. But I know from my prior experience with the county, the unified government can actually engage in swaps with a private entity so long as it's equal or greater value that is being received on behalf of the citizens. So if there was a private developer that wanted to do this, perhaps the land bank could be involved, and we'll dive into that. But it is also plausible that the county could make that swap and then pass that land to the land bank if it felt like doing so, offered some advantage.
Okay.
We're happy looking at that and research.
Okay, yeah, I have a question about zoning. There are properties in the land bank that are owned by the government and they're under certain zoning categories. Could we kind of eliminate or alter the zoning or not, or I guess make it like not liable to the zoning? So if it were redeveloped, it wouldn't have to go through all the hoops to be redeveloped into affordable housing?
That would still be under the commission purview.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if it could be done by the land bank or if the land bank would approach the county for that approval.
That's an interesting question. My initial thought is that they would still have to comply with our planning and zoning ordinances. We can look at that.
I mean, I wonder if we could like come up with a process by which agreements could be reached without going through, because that seems to be a big hindrance to development, is going through all the hoops and all the variances.
But that would be part of the land bank's responsibility is take care of all of that.
So if the land bank were to come up with an agreement to alter the zoning or whatever,
Then they would go through that process themselves.
the land bank would go through the planning commission.
Yeah, and there's a bit of a unique concept here because Athens-Clarke County property is largely either zone G for government or P for park. Neither of those really carry forward to the private sector or even our nonprofit partners. So there's been 2 instances in my career where we've considered a sale on behalf of the unified government. The first was the Kelly Diversified building. And in that case, the sale said, we intend to zone it CD, commercial downtown. The other is the slow movement of the cooperative extension facility on West Broad. And in that case, Gavin Hassemer brought it forward for a rezone to CG, knowing that the intent was to get rid of it. So they kind of trued up that zoning before it would go to market. I think certainly zoning will be a topic we can look into, but one thing to keep in mind is, to Linda's point, the authority could appeal for zoning if they felt like it was needed, even on other properties. So if there's stuff that's shown maybe in future land use as higher density or multifamily, they could just like a private developer ask for that rezone before selling or marketing a property.
I mean, I'm just thinking of instances where, a full rezone may not be appropriate for a certain property, but, certain variances to the zoning would be. And, but it's extremely costly and time consuming to go through that process to determine what those are. And maybe if those negotiations were made within the land bank authority to exempt them from having to go through this, or maybe the land bank authority with cooperation from, say, the commissioner of the district or a small committee or something like that. People who might represent the immediate area.
Just for me, piggybacking on, I like to keep the process as it is, that, even with the establishment of LBA, for them to go through the standard process that it goes through the mayor commission. But I do, because I know you're in a hurry. Can you finish? I have some questions, but I'll wait till you're done.
And if he doesn't get to them, he'll send them.
Yeah.
Well, I can leave and come back. I just have to do a quick meeting with DCA.
No.
I'm very sorry about that. They now got
DCA is,
put back to back on me. Okay, so here's a little bit of history of the Athens-Clarke County Land Bank Authority. So on March 25th of 2009, the LRC recommended that we actually create a land bank. On May of 2009, the attorney's office gave some more guidance in a memorandum regarding the Land Bank Authority, law and applicability, and how to establish and operate one. And then on July 7th, 2009, Mayor and Commission actually approved and adopted a resolution which established the Athens-Clarke County Land Bank. And I'm not going to read through this, but this is the resolution that established it. The most important thing, though, and this is kind of where we would have to work with the attorney's office, because once you start looking at the bylaws, it kind of overrides this resolution. But the resolution was pretty specific to nuisance properties, turning them into tax generating properties for the county. So it was a little specific back in 2009, but as you'll see, next slide, we move forward to the powers that were invested into the Land Bank Authority regarding properties. So they can be acquired and they can be classified and then held and also managed, maintained, protected, rented, leased. So they can do all the things that the law allows a Land Bank Authority to do within their purview. Next. And so the bylaws for the Athens-Clarke County Land Bank Authority were adopted and made effective on October 8th, 2013. So they adopted 5 members, require 3 for a quorum. So 5 is the minimum. Remember, you can have 5 to 11. And this body at the time selected to have 5 with a quorum of 3. Members are appointed by the commission for 4-year terms. Those terms may be reappointed for a subsequent 4-year term. No limits on that. So someone could serve in perpetuity if the commission selects them to do so. They can be, again, an elected official or an employee of the unified government. The board at that time agreed to have an annual meeting on the 2nd Tuesday of October, and then they agreed to have other meetings scheduled as they were needed. All meetings are public. And then all written records have to be filed with the clerk of commission within 15 days of the meeting that occurs. And the board annually selects a chairperson, vice chairperson, secretary, and a treasurer.
And Sherry and Austin, something that might require some consideration. So kind of bleeds with our next topic, but it seems like the original authority was started with a resolution. And it certainly reflects on the powers granted through state code. If the GOC and the Mayor Commission choose to reinitiate the authority or kind of, I guess it still exists, it just doesn't have members, right?
That's right. It's just sort of defunct.
Right. Would it be a best practice to codify that in a local ordinance, or would the resolution continue to be sufficient? What would you recommend, or what?
So under state law, it can be created by resolution or ordinance. We
Mhm.
certainly have current resolution, so I don't know that we necessarily need to adopt a new ordinance. So
Okay.
that's the line, I just felt that was the way it wanted to go.
Let's want to have a little bit more,
Eat to it.
yeah. It would be the ordinance to the resolution, because, you know, to me, when I look at resolutions, they really don't, they don't have enough teeth. So I think from my perspective, you know, I'm just one commission, I think the ordinance may be an order.
Sure, we certainly could, but an ordinance would be an actual law versus the resolution. So to your point,
Yeah,
I'm
especially,
thinking about like Peace Bob, that's through an ordinance,
Right.
so certainly could do that.
okay,
Well, and then, I'm sorry.
We'll spend some time on this and follow up.
Well, and just, quick summary, I'm not gonna go through every one, but essentially, everything that is allowed in the Georgia law for a land bank authority was adopted as a bylaw for Athens-Clarke County's Land Bank Authority. So there's really nothing in there that they can't do. It allows them, again, to acquire, purchase, and lease, land, to, they can apply for federal, state, or local funding. They can administer funds in the form of a loan. They can enter into partnerships, joint ventures, and collaborative relationships with us, the county, or other private or public entities, and they can hold the titles to the real property. Next. Okay, so that's why I didn't want to get into all the details, because essentially, if you look at the bylaws from 2013 and you look at the Georgia laws for land bank, they mirror each other. So they've got a pretty good ability to operate. We had the opportunity to take advantage of a guest speaker, Mr. Sean Edwards, who is the current executive director of the Georgia Land Bank Authority. He's a long-term member of what we call GALBA. And he's willing to meet with the GOC at your November 18th meeting to answer questions about Land Bank Authority operations. And the reason that we spoke with him is because Augusta tends to focus on affordable housing and neighborhood revitalization. So we thought it might more closely mirror what we're interested in doing here. He did begin work in Atlanta. He has a lot of experience in private mortgage lending and underwriting and nonprofit lending, which is important if you're going to have a land bank authority that does loans. And he also focuses on the revitalization of vacant, abandoned, and dilapidated properties, which is what a lot of land banks focus on. So if you're interested in that, we can get that set up. Next slide. And what you can do is prior to that November 18th meeting, you can submit questions to staff, and we can make sure that we get those to Mr. Edwards so he is prepared to speak on those questions and then answer further questions. But also HCD staff is going to attend the Georgia, the GALBA 2024 summit on the 29th and the 30th in Atlanta. So if you want to get us questions before the 29th that you want us to take to that summit, we can also do that and try to get some questions that we can get answered and bring back those answers for you. Okay, and that's it. So you've got 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Yeah.
So executive board, and thank you for sending this. Executive board, can we put, let me clarify, can we make sure that creating the executive board, that the executive person must not be a local developer or own property in ACC? Is that something reasonable or rational?
I think we're gonna probably need to look into that. Yeah.
I think there's some latitude amongst the land bank authority to set, you know, like whether certain members have certain skills or qualifications, things like that. But I don't know the answer to your question. So
That's what my question, could we have on that executive board attorneys, real estate people, or bankers?
Yeah.
yes,
Yes, you absolutely can. It's encouraged to have members that actually understand real estate, that understand property management, that understand developing. So it's not going to hurt you to have members that understand what you're trying to accomplish so that they can help make those decisions.
Okay.
And yeah, and Saunders answered my question about the ordinance. Alrighty.
Yeah, so again, maybe a question that I think we report to you guys. How would this affect our nonprofit who are really doing like affordable housing? Would they be in competition with the land bank?
No, they would still be qualified to apply for CDBG and home just like they do now. This may just be another resource for them to tap into. But it also opens it up to private developers that aren't necessarily able or willing to work with federal red tape. So it really does expand the access rather than reduce it.
Okay. And one thing you all mentioned about any commissioners could be on this thing. I guess if we do an ordinance, in my mind, I would make commissioners ex officio maybe if somebody is to be a part of that stuff. I think it could be a little bit of conflict of interest. I don't know. Maybe you guys can answer that and looking ahead. But I think in my mind, maybe we should be, if the mayor, whoever we select from the commission, be ex officio. Attend meeting, but really not voting members.
Sure.
So just food for thought.
And
I
I think
suppose
that's
there are
what we're
scenarios-
doing is for staff as well.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over
No,
you.
that was my fault.
No, so under state law, you certainly can make a member of the mayor commission, member of the LDA, but you wouldn't necessarily have to. And so, I've not researched your specific question, but my initial thought is you probably could set parameters on how the, member of the mayor commission who's on the board gets tied to the board, whether that's an ex officio or a regular voting member.
And, the other thing, preserving our green space, and purchasing properties for future development. So, just some of the questions I will be asking, on the 18th. But something that we should all be, taking into consideration as well, just preserving our green space and, make sure it, yeah,
When you say future property development, do you mean like on behalf of the local government?
department, so like fire station,
Right.
police department or something.
And because we're focusing on, well, my question was, will our land bank be, sufficient if we, solely focus on, affordable housing? Because I know we had the conversation about central services already have a process in place for the larger parcels. Does that confine us or?
I wouldn't only have your land bank just do affordable housing.
Okay.
It's capable of doing other things. It can certainly do parks. It can do, it can help with development of green space. It can do industry. So I wouldn't restrict it, but what you would want to do is tie the county money that's invested into it, possibly to the affordable housing component.
Oh, okay.
And then when you're developing the plan and you have an IGA in place with them, they can do this with this money. And it's already developed, it's already determined in the ordinance or the setup that they do this with all the other stuff. Did that make sense?
So will central service still have its purview to do offload on the whole property?
So, yeah, and I've captured that question as like what overlap would happen with the other functions being done by ACC Gov staff. I think that could look at both acquisition and disposition.
So I don't think you would give ownership of all or management of all ACC Gov property to a land bank. What you would do is develop properties that can be developed for the purpose of affordable housing. That is what you would give to the land bank. They would manage those properties. The government would continue to manage all the other.
Right.
So they'd be totally separate parcels. Does that make more
If you
sense?
think about your existing authorities that have high levels of autonomy, so the Downtown Development Authority, the Classic Center Authority, you kind of create this baby, if you will, through the enabling ordinance and the or other supporting documents, and then it runs with a pretty high level of autonomy. Like they can make decisions within that ordinance that may or may not be directly aligned with ACC Gov's immediate needs. However, anytime that there would be an exchange of resources either direction, I think the attorney's office would probably tell you it's a best practice to have an IGA, an intergovernmental agreement. And in that, you can be very specific in your intent. So you could say, we're giving you this property to advance affordable housing. So then if it's sold for $1 general, you would look back and say like, that doesn't look like it's affordable housing, right? So you have to kind of think about it. You provide that framework in which you set the baby up to start to run, and then any additional instruction is going to tend to be given either with the appointment of members, as you see with your other BACs, trying to guide and shape how something might continue to be managed, or if there's an exchange of resources.
So if we're gonna fund it, possibly hire somebody to do it, where they're gonna be housed at.
Sure.
Will they be physically located in what department? They gotta be, talking about a talent, they gotta report to somebody though. That would be,
They
I
report to their board.
get that. But still gotta.
They're not, they wouldn't
They would
be
not, so-
employees of Athens-Clarke County. They're their own authority. They're their own entity. So they are not employees of the county.
Said about see, so we'll see them.
Sure.
That'd be more about us.
And Melinda, I know you may have to go. So the question I have for this board as we move forward, we got some questions here. We're going to send a follow-up email where you can ask any other questions you'd like staff to address, either with this gentleman who's going to come or through the conference, or with the help, certainly with the help of the attorney's office. The charge I keep going to is a plan to restart the Land Bank Authority. And to your point, I think staff would tell you the most successful land bank authorities have resources. They have staff, they have the ability to engage with legal counsel, they might have banking resources, that kind of thing. So we intend to come back and kind of show you what an operational budget might look like. And then there'll be ways that you can decide if you want to seed that. So one could be using existing housing dollars that have been identified. Another could be potentially, if you were interested in it, we could look at ACC land and say, well, what might we move off of our inventory now to a land bank authority to help kind of build out their inventory. The third would just be a general fund contribution, probably in the FY26 budget cycle. Are you all interested in staff bringing back some of what I might say is the low-hanging fruit on ACC properties, where we've screened them and said, yeah, these ones are probably well suited for affordable housing, or even just to get off of our books to generate revenue? And you could see what that might look like.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Commissioner Fisher, when you think about, we were talking about the IGA and the local money, that's where you're able to more control what is going on with that money in the beginning. So you may be seeding the initial employee to carry out, but the majority of the money, all of the money is coming from the county in the beginning. So you're really going to have, they're going to be doing what you have set up in that agreement in the beginning. It's not until they start generating their own revenue that they might start doing some activities independent of that.
okay. And Commissioner Link, if you get a follow-up for Commissioner Link's question as well.
The zoning?
Spots and zoning.
Yeah, I've got those noted. So I have 11 questions, and I will share them with you when we ask for any additional.
Thank you, and I'm sorry. I had
Thank
to leave.
But ACC staff can be on the executive board, correct?
Yes,
That's correct.
Okay.
even ex officio but they could actually be a city member as well.
But there's a lady named Melinda Lord up there.
Oh, my goodness.
You need more to
I'm
do.
flattered. Yes, always, right? Thank you.
Thank you, and I guess we'll be moving on. Any further questions?
I think that's a good start though.
Yeah, we're off to a really good start.
I meant to ask you, we didn't get this in email form, did we?
I know, we can send it to you.
Yeah.
Moving on to the proverbial always BAC. Gene, okay.
Here.
Yeah. So, there we have another presentation that's going to walk us through our, how we should proceed forward.
Sure. So if y'all remember, as you've kind of tackled this at different times, there's been some key questions that there's a slide of things like compensation and ACC staff involvement. Today, we're going to try to help take you on a deeper guided dive on that, where we might get some direction on a resolution to some of those questions. The thought is that any significant changes would be added or revised into the board's authorities and commission's manual, and that could be something that's recommended to the broader body. And then we'll touch a little bit on just the overall BACs, and is there any desire to combine or even potentially eliminate some of the ones? And we'll give a little bit of context there as well. So if you'll move to the next slide, kind of cover those two items. And then the next slide is the tiers. So again, reminding you of the tiers, you have kind of these state either required or authorized empowered BACs. That's a tier 1. Largely, our hands are tied on those. Those have high autonomy and limited intervention. Tier 2 is what I might call locally created. So these typically are in ordinance. Typically, they're going to be mayor and commission appointed. Tier 3 are those committees that are created by the mayor. And then tier 4 is other. Today, when we talk about this, we're really going to be talking a lot around those tier 2 BACs. So those ones that you all have the most control and direction on. Okay, next slide. So one of those questions was, how might we change the application and interview process? And you'll see some history there. Speaking with the clerk's office and with staff, there were a few important points. One is, if you structure it, you're not actually obligated to interview in person. So these interviews could be set up virtually if that's something you desired, or you could continue to do it in person. It would be whatever you feel is appropriate there. Another thing is reappointments. So when individuals are serving and then their term is up and they seek to fill or serve, volunteer for another term, it's very common, north of 90% of the time, the commission places them back on that board. They have, great knowledge and history in that space usually. Do you want to continue to use the all-call process where everybody comes in, or do you want to consider a process where you might expedite reappointments when they're sought so that you don't have to go through those extra steps? Another question or point here is that at times you'll have people that are applying for a lot of BACs, and that may not be a best practice. Like, the willingness to serve is great, but are you passionate about cultural affairs, or are you passionate about planning and zoning? It would probably be better to find people that could narrow their focus into that to help you all find folks that fit there. And so there's actually more focused key questions around this one topic, and hopefully that can be discussed a little bit today. So the first is, there are BACs that are either mayor appointed. So right now the TAD committees are completely mayor appointed. And then there are ones that make their own recommendations and the mayor and commission just give it a yes, no. And those, we've had examples of the past. I know that the tree council is one of them. Do you all have a preference on whether or not the mayor and commission should be involved with all of those screening and appointments, or are you comfortable with it the way that it's been?
So a huge discussion to have. I came in with a different angle about the mayor appointed. I want to eliminate most of those. But I have my own thought process with that, but that's on the floor, so. But our charter does give the mayor the opportunity to create them. And he or she will have the authority to dispose of them, not the mayor commission. That's correct. Okay. So the screening process.
I probably think the mayor and commission should continue to be involved. Because I think all of the mayor constituents, they may have an interest, and if we're just doing it, it may be a little bit, they say, well, why Jill is on doing these interviews, why not the rest of the commissioners? So that divided. So our first inkling of the chair would be, we continue to do it as commissioners and mayor to appoint these boards. And again, I'm just one vote.
I mean, I've got thoughts as far as like these standing commissions that regularly offer advice, or recommendations to the commission. I believe the whole commission should be involved in appointing those. But when it comes to these kind of more ad hoc committees, I mean, the charter does give the mayor clear authority to create and appoint.
Sure, and I think what we're talking about is not ad hoc committees, because
Yeah.
as much as the commission might recommend things, the mayor has great authority there.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about is, yes, anything that would be established in ordinance would typically be a, kind of that tier 2 VAC. I have some list here if you wanted to see them, and we'll actually see more. Actually, let me.
It's important that the whole commission vets for those folks, because we have had instances in the past with mayor appointing committees that are definitely skewed. In the past administration, that's definitely not balanced. And
If I could take that really quickly, I just want to add a clarifying point, which is that when we talk about the fact that it could be done virtually, that means it would have to be less than a quorum. of the
Right.
commission. So if you want all of the commission to be involved, then those would have to continue to be in person. And also to be clear, it would have to be less than a quorum of like a committee as well. So it would not, if it were, for instance, the GOC itself, not just like members, but like the GOC is the one who's tasked with this, that would also need to be an open meeting. So it would be best that if it's less than a quorum, it's not a quorum of those bodies either.
So I would say, for the benefit of the public and for the people applying, that virtually would be the most optimal. Because like getting to City Hall at a certain time or whatnot could be challenging. Plus, I love City Hall, but I love my home as well. What are y'all thoughts?
I mean, I'm all for some virtual. Yeah, I'm all for some virtual interviews, if it will help speed up the process. I mean, there are people who can't show up to the city hall at that day and time who miss out on being appointed. We've had really good candidates. We've missed out on them because of that. And it's, also for us, I mean, we've got so many balls in there. I've got a day job. I have to take off, like sometimes a whole afternoon of work to go through these.
And so we've not streamed or recorded interviews, is that right?
And I don't think we should. I mean, I feel like these are job interviews.
Yeah, so then we enter into executive session.
Well, you wouldn't have to if you're less than a committee, less than.
And I don't think there's an authorization to enter an executive.
Okay.
So it's either public, which is how you had been doing them,
Mhm.
or you could change it to being either a closed meeting or a virtual meeting, but it would have to be less of a quorum. Less than.
Okay.
And also, I think there's, as Andrew pointed off, 3, I think I can think of offhand that essentially provide you all with a list of appointees to approve up and down. I think it's KCCB, ACAC, and Community Tree Council.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's appropriate for those bodies.
What do y'all think?
I mean, they're very
So-
specified.
They give us, so they tell us essentially who they want on that board and we approve it, and it's staggered.
It's not like a hospital,
Yeah,
do the same thing. They send us a list of candidates. And they do 2. It's 3, I think, what we just got, 6 candidates for the next appointment for three spots on the hospital authority. So their authority goes through the application process.
Mhm.
Then they send it to us to screen, and then we still make the recommendation. They do the screening, so do the screening process for us a little bit. And narrow it down to those 6 candidates.
so do,
I like that a little bit from some authorities, if they had the time to do that, that would be helpful to us.
yeah. So can you elaborate more on your statement? So do we as a body want to pick every you know, every applicant go through the process or allow some of these entities to make their own? And then what's to be the justification for that?
Mention, before we have that, with our tier ones, which is pretty much, we have to have that process. The tier one, do they make a recommendation or we go through those?
I think it varies greatly. So some of them, there are designated commission board members. I'm thinking about again like ADDA. But then to my knowledge, ADDA screens and selects the rest of their board.
I can't speak specifically to APA, but I think you're right. I think it's incredibly variable. A lot of it is set by state law as to who has to be on them or what type. So it's very, we'd have to look at each one, I think.
I think on ADDA, one has to be a downtown
Mhm.
property owner. I think it's a bit on those criteria, but they
So,
still
for
go.
this, I was saying with our tier one, maybe let them make the recommendation to us. And with them, although there are criteria there that we have to pick from,
Sure.
but that may be a lot easier than looking at tier two. Based on what they do, maybe if they have the capability to do that, to go through the process and they send it to us, you know.
And like, you bring up a valid point too, because like, even though they make a recommendation to us, we don't have to approve that recommendation.
I mean, I think these authorities that do have some autonomy, I think it is important that we vet the candidates, so there is some voice, I mean, from the mayor and commission on those authorities, because they can have massive impacts. They have, development authority and stuff like that. So like with the ADDA and Classic Center Authority, I think it is crucial that we maintain,
Well, and
really good point.
again, I'm trying to keep us on tier two for a minute, which is on this list that I've shared with you, because these are wholly within your control. There's not overarching state law necessarily that gets too involved with membership. So the advantage of self-selection is it saves everybody time, right? So if, KACCB at this point probably has a pretty good understanding of what makes a good board member volunteer, and they just send forward some folks. If you wanted more knowledge on that, what you could say is we want information on all applicants and your recommended candidates. And that way you just kind of see like, well, did only 3 people apply for 3 vacancies? If so, there's not worth a ton of time on this. I can see Jeff's
Well, I was
nervous.
I think, not speaking for those, but I think I can safely say that at least for 2 of the 3 of those, they generally don't have, it's not like they get 5 applicants and they choose one. I know CTC frankly has ongoing applications
Right.
throughout the year, and they're a little unusual. They don't even have time frames because they're constantly seeking members for that position. So I think, to Andrew's point, you certainly can ask that. I don't know that you'll get a list of 10 and here's our 3. I think it may get, here's our 3 and here's the 3. Well, they may have a few extra.
I mean, I'm still very interested in combining some of these committees.
And we will get into that discussion. So maybe you'll get some clarity around that once you see what your hopes and dreams are for these tier 2 committees. Because right now you see that number 330 potential volunteers. I don't know that anybody has time to screen
Yeah.
330 slots. I did hear from y'all some interest in conducting interviews virtually. Understanding what that would basically mean is a mayor special appointed group or groups of 4 commissioners or less who would be doing that screening and then making recommendations to the full body. But doing that with no quorum and not working off of an existing committee allows that to be virtual and probably is more efficient use of your time.
I would say, can we get consensus on that?
Well, when he had done it past, he broke those up, he get the GOC.
Yeah.
But then he gave also.
Correct, and I think the guidance we would offer the mayor is to not use a standing committee member for member, because then it's actually a quorum of the committee. Whereas if the mayor were to say, oh, well, I want commissioners from districts 1 through 4 to be on the screening commission or committee, and I want 5 through 8 to be on it, and I want 9 and 10 and myself to do a third one, and we're gonna divvy it up this way, then none of that is a,
Well, I want to be clear, we're not gonna create new committees to do
Right.
this, it will just be like appointing folks. But you're right, what he's done in the past has been fine, because they've always been open to the public, they've been advertised as open meetings. But what we're talking about now is doing closed meetings and or virtual, and that's where we need to avoid a quorum of any.
Yeah.
So exactly what Andrew said, if he just randomly selects a number of commissioners that are not a quorum of a different body, and they have that task that they're gonna interview those people, then that's perfectly appropriate.
I like that.
Yeah.
okay? Let's pivot for a second to reappointment. So, the clerk's office has shared a high level of reappointments, and right now it's kind of an all call. And so you might have 5 applicants for 2 vacancies, and one of those is a reappointment request. I think at one point, the clerk's office had proposed kind of an internal review for reappointment. I saw that in some of Ms. Jean's notes. But basically, do you want to continue to have reappointments just be part of an all call? Or do you want to ask if somebody's interested in reappointing and having kind of a quick and dirty screening, if you will, before you go to an all call?
I have thoughts.
Go ahead.
I think a reappointment with, recommendation from the body, not American Commission, but the body of the committee that they serve on is appropriate for 1 term maybe. But beyond that, maybe I think they should go through the process, because I feel like it's healthy to have some turnover on these boards and to give the greater public a chance to come in and serve.
I like this, keep it as is, they go through the process.
Okay. And that, if you stay with the process, that gets to your conclusion.
I mean, we do, I feel like, we often reappoint people because there is some institutional knowledge that's important to maintain on these
Yeah.
committees. And, people have been sitting on the committee for 4 years, they know how things work, they've learned, and going out to the ordinance, especially when it comes to things like the planning commission and the HPC.
So, can you elaborate on that though? Like, what are we missing? So should we not screen them?
Hey, so Melissa's point is they do bring institutional knowledge, so maybe we should, see do they want to be reappointed?
Okay.
If they do, and maybe we bring them in as individuals, just get some information from them and ask them why they want to be reappointed.
Or maybe just a letter, if they could just give us something in writing,
Yeah.
a statement in writing.
We'll put them through all with the other candidates. That's just me. I think if they want to be reappointed, I think we should maybe have a separate process for them.
Yeah.
Give them a letter.
And if they do want to be reappointed and we agree that that's appropriate, then we don't even bother putting out a call.
So behind the scene, Gene's clerk commission office notifies all of them. So if we're thinking of a 2-step process and we say, okay, this applicant is incumbent, and we're going to, and there's 2 positions open. So and we all agree to say, okay, we're gonna accept this incumbent. So then the clerk commission don't contact that individual for an interview? Or do we leave that open?
Ms. Jean?
Or do we, you know what I'm saying?
Well, and I've given you one hypothetical, but you could just have one vacancy that's somebody who's already seeking reappointment. So when you do this all call, the advantage is you see what the community interest is. But right now, what we've seen is there hasn't been a huge tendency to deviate from the existing serving candidate.
Yeah.
And so it's just a question of time. Do you want to ask volunteers to take that time to apply and interview? Do you want to use your own time for that? I think, Ms. Jean, if I recall correctly, in one of your notes, you had suggested reappointments could be considered by a working group of the mayor pro tem, and the past pro tem. And then so under that scenario, they would review it. They'd say, Sarah, are you interested in a reappointment? She says, yes. she would still submit maybe a letter or an application. It would be reviewed by this smaller group and they would say, yeah, you know what, we think Sarah should continue, and that would come to the mayor and commission. On the other hand, if they're like, well, it's been a good run with Sarah, but we want to see what else is there, then they would just convert to that all call.
I still think there should be term limits to go through that speeded up process. Like, after 1 or 2 terms, or 2 or 3 terms.
Are we talking about terms or are we talking about?
Well, we're talking about reappointments, but
Yeah, like maybe that process for the first reappointment, or maybe even the second reappointment, depending on how long the terms are. But, I feel like that's a way we could end up getting to people just having lifetime memberships on these boards, get no opportunity for new blood.
But if you have the mayor pro tem and past mayor pro tem as a governing body to go through the reappointment, maybe we as a commission can say, hey, this person been.
Well, but without anyone else to compare them to, I think they're just more likely to reappoint. Most people serve pretty well on these, but once in a while we've gotten candidates that are just so awesome. And you recognize that the person who's sitting there has been there for 10 years and, maybe we need to freshen things up a little bit.
What are y'all thoughts? I like the, just letting the mayor pro tem, govern a small body like that.
Yeah.
Do the reappointments.
But into perpetuity though, that's the thing, that's
But
my
do we
thing.
put limits? Are you asking, do we put limits?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, 2 terms, what,
I think-
4, that's 8 years. Am I tripping?
it depends.
I mean, depending on the position, say 8 years. I mean, because we have 2-term,
Mhm.
2-year positions too.
Yeah.
So maybe we say an 8-year limit, and after 8 years, they go through the whole process. You invite them
Yeah.
again.
Is that,
Otherwise you just keep.
I think you could have like a first reappointment review committee, and then any future reappointments would have to be an all call.
Okay.
Okay?
And I would use the hospital authority, because I served on that board. I had to roll off though after I did 2 terms.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them do have term limits, and I think that is wise.
Yeah. I couldn't feel that.
We're requirable lead time, because we have to start this month in advance for every time for the vacancy. If that person is not want to be reappointed or they're not recommended, then you've got to advertise maybe 2 versus 1.
I mean, yeah, a simple notification to them saying your term is up. Would you like to be reappointed? If so, submit this documentation by this date.
Yeah.
And make that date be, at least a week or 2 before the call. And I would think a small committee like that could make that decision pretty quickly.
And Sherry, because it's not a forum, could that committee even make that decision via email or phone call if that's what they wanted to do, or?
Yes, I just want to be really clear, I don't want to use the word committee because we're not
Okay,
creating,
sorry.
committee, but
That
those
review group.
individuals, yeah, whoever's tasked with this particular, task. I think, yeah, they absolutely could do it by email, because there's no open meeting requirement, because it wouldn't be a meeting under the purposes of the.
Last point on this one question is focus. So let's think about all call applicants for a while. So the 3 times a year, the clerk's office looks at vacancies or upcoming vacancies, and they say, if you're interested in serving, we have 2 vacancies on the planning commission, 1 on the hearings board, yada, yada, yada. I think what staff would recommend to you is that when people apply, they indicate their primary interest and their secondary, if any, and then leave it at that. And not just say, I'm willing to serve on any of these 16 boards.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Okay.
I only think 1 or 2 is
Yeah, 1 or 2, just in case if 1 isn't open.
Right.
okay.
So you know, option then that you can only apply for the 2.
You say, I would ask you, what are you applying for, and would you like to be considered for one other commission, if any, right, kind of deal?
Yeah.
And no, I just am interested in planning commission kind of deal.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think it would be helpful to get have specific applications for specific committees. Because I mean, the Cultural Affairs Commission and, the Human Relations Commission are two completely different things, and we rarely get very specific replies on those applications. Like, it might be helpful to have the committees actually create those applications. So we have I think some of us don't even fully understand what some of these BACs do behind the scenes. It might be helpful to have those committees create an application that kind of outlines what a good committee member might be, what they need on the committee.
And I think that can be discussed, like even with the enabling legislation, maybe, and the clerk's office, I'm sure would have some insights on how they'd like to do that, just even from a procedural standpoint.
I think also that might weed out applicants who don't even know. Very frequently, we get applicants who really have no idea what the committees they're applying for are doing. They just want to serve their community. And I think if they get an application in front of them that's asking very specific questions, they can be like, whoa, I'm not cut out for this.
But we do like applicants to apply.
We do.
We really think it's-
Well, in the specific, the application might actually lure more candidates in who all of a sudden will realize what the committee does and be like, hey, I can do that.
Okay, so we're gonna,
So what I'm hearing is primary and no more than one alternate, maybe even primary only, but,
primary and alternate.
and then it's kind of a follow-up question of what role, if any, should the BACs have in having some standard questions that are asked on an application that would get to knowledge and interest?
Yeah, it would help us.
Look at their interest.
Was that part of the clerk's office? Because we don't go around the clerk office and they can back us. We can do that.
Yeah, because right now we just have one standard application. We would have to have something more
Tailored.
tailored towards, what
Each
that
BAC.
board does.
There would be
They also ask you to state your expertise and your experience with that, so everybody has the opportunity to share what they think they can bring to the committee, whatever, and how they relate to it. So that's already on the application, I think.
Did she say it's already on?
She says she feels like it's covered in those kind of open-ended questions.
There would be, I would say, also from the functional standpoint. Right now, there is the one application that we had helped develop as a web-based form. Of course, ACAC has their own application process, as does CTC, so they have some specific things, I think. But if we do ultimately, different versions of them, we do have to steer people to different places to apply, which we certainly can do.
I guess it
I
would
think
change.
everybody uses the same basic application. We had that several years ago. We need to be consistent in application. So I think they all try to use the same one.
We did try to standardize that amongst some of the questions that the commission asked that were very different from some of the other ones to say, at least can you use this continued language for certain things?
Okay.
Would it be difficult for your department to say, for instance, if they pick planning or hearings for it to tailor a certain type of those questions to this applicant and different questions to another?
No, not necessarily. We just would have to look at each time we were doing a call, which boards were being requested and kind of tailor it for each one. If planning commission had specific questions and solid waste advisory commission had specific ones, we can build those into the form. We would just have to, you couldn't copy it and do it the way we do it now. We just have to tailor it a little bit more. We certainly can do that.
Yeah, I like the idea of tailoring it, because if I'm applying for the planning commission, they're gonna get training through the state anyway. I do believe, right? Planning folks, no, no.
I think there are trainings
I don't
available.
think planning, Texas stuff. I don't think ACA.
Yeah. So, but just what planning entails, it will be different from solid waste. So if you use a standard application, if I'm applying for planning, I want specific knowledge about zoning and, development in Athens versus picking up trash and beautification and stuff, so.
And I will say that is one of the reasons, I think, Gene, correct me if I'm wrong, that they ask individuals to fill out a different form for each one, so that in the question about what expertise do you have or interest, if you're filling out one for solid waste, you would put that expertise in there, and then when you fill out one for planning, you would put that expertise in
Okay.
there. I think that's part of the reason they do that. Is that right, Gene?
That's correct, that's correct.
I think if I would all help, then we would have seen the BAC application.
Yeah,
No shade, I'm just
We-
shade for us, because we're trying, I sound.
We can definitely bring in a BAC application.
And you look at it actually now, because we're actually soliciting for BACs right now.
Yeah.
Well, let's come to the next slide. So training, the manual specifies that training should be required, it speaks to some kind of semi-regular training opportunities. What's happened in practice is staff in the attorney's office have created basically virtual training, self-directed on our learning management system, the LMS. And to do that, you have to have a ACC Gov email address. At this point, that's all on the front end. So it's kind of given to you, but the ability and the teeth behind it are not great. So uptake is pretty variable. It depends on the drive of that individual, maybe even in their technical skills.
you just plain uptake with that.
So we might send it to 30 individuals, and with enough prodding, you might get 12, 15, whatever, that actually do it. And then a lot of them, it goes undone. And there is some material in there around open meetings, open records that is important, both for transparency and good governance, but also just to kind of limit liability a bit. That you want people that are effective in this role. So we would actually recommend to you that training be mandatory. And that basically that an individual would have approximately 180 days from the time they're placed on a BAC to complete this training. And we could do a notice at 90 days. So you get kind of the naughty list. And that way, if you knew somebody in the community, Sarah could call and be like, hey, Andrew, what's up? I need you to take your training, or they're going to pick you off that BAC. What we would also suggest is that if it's not completed at 180 days, 6 months after your appointment, maybe this isn't the best fit for you and that you would be removed from your BAC position.
I would say yes. But why, when I read this earlier, what's the justification for 90 days? Because if I'm applying for solid waste, I'm thinking like I need to have my email ready, all that fun stuff ready, and the training should be done before I attend the first meeting. So why 90 days?
Well, I would tell you from a functional perspective, at least for part of that, is there are some logistic steps involved in getting the names from the liaisons, which come to me to set up and check with IT to get that established, to get them their instructions, to deal out any technical. There is a little bit of time sometimes based on when we find out about the appointment as to their next meeting. Because in theory, if you appoint at a regular session on the first, all of the BACs basically are going to meet in the next 30 days. So honestly, I think, and a lot of times it's a challenge for us to even sometimes get their email set up before then, because we don't know until you all approve them. 90 days itself, I'd say, is fairly arbitrary in terms of how we came up with that. There may be some LMS automated components. I think Carrie has told me that they have the ability to turn some stuff on to sort of reset you to 0 after certain days. I think 90 is maybe the default in that, but there's no hard deadline for a 90-day thing. We just wanted to make sure we had enough time to get our logistical stuff done and then give them a little bit of grace, whether that's 60, whether that's 90. I mean, that's kind of
45 days.
I kind of feel like they should at least have awareness of open meetings and those kind of like state constitutional outlines as to their service on the committee. I feel like they should sign up on a document saying they understand that state law.
Just piggyback, you bring up an important point that they're doing, when it comes to open meetings and stuff, they need to understand that before they attend the first
Yeah.
meeting. So
I think there are things that need to be clear.
So they do receive the BAC manual and some communication from the clerk's office, correct, when they are appointed. So once the commission, if not, we can make that happen. So what we could say is, congratulations, Andrew, you've been appointed to whatever BAC. this is the most important thing for you to read before your next meeting. Here's the training you've got to complete by date A. And if you don't complete it by date B, then your service is,
Well, I
subject
think
to
it's
end.
important for them to sign some kind of document that says, I agree, or I have, before they even, they sit down at that first meeting, sign a document saying, I have read this manual, I do understand the Open Meetings Act. I think that gives it, I mean, do they sign any kind of document or agreement or contract? I mean, I feel like that would make it a little more official and prompt them to get, and in that document say, I will complete this training within the next 45 days.
There's a training, I think I seen part of that video that was made like 2 years ago. It's not long.
It's about 2.5 to 3 hours for all of the 5 segments.
Okay.
Some are.
I jumped on the board, yeah. So never mind.
I mean, maybe, ask them to complete that training by their next meeting.
I mean, I will say that certain things, like, for example, the Open Meetings Act, generally speaking, from a new person coming into that, knowing that it's an open meeting is probably the most important thing, but realistically speaking, the chair and the liaison are really the ones more responsible for posting the agenda, publicly notifying, making sure that it's streamed, that kind of thing. So most of that's probably taken care of for that, first meeting. Open records to that point, I think is certainly important, and one of the reasons that we've tried to set up the ACC Gov email addresses from some of that standpoint. So perhaps there's, if nothing else, within the manual or even a short primer on here's a few things you need to know before your first one.
Well, I also think it adds some seriousness
Yeah,
to the appointment. In their mind, they'll recognize this is very much an official capacity and there are legal ramifications to what goes down in these meetings.
Perhaps we could insert with the application that summarizes the Open Meetings and Open Records Act, maybe a one-page summary, so they'd be aware of before they even apply. I think the application says they're willing to apply, to their job, what is required. I think it's already.
and to also include that it's mandatory that they use the ACC Gov email that's provided.
And that is an upcoming slide.
Okay.
So, but before we hop off, so I think Ms. Jean's point is at least a good, very high level introductory, like when you apply, there's gonna be no more than a one pager, like, hey, just so you know, these general things apply to your service. And so the act of submitting the application would be acknowledgement that they understood that very foundational aspect. Then the training, I would still suggest to you not to go too short on it. I'm just thinking about life, summer, I've got kids, I'm juggling, whatever. I may not get it in 45 days. And especially if you're going to automate removal, you don't want to just be constantly placing people and then cutting them without some, concerted effort to get them up to speed. And a lot of this will come down to those liaisons and how well they can help coordinate. And so one of the things that we've noted, doesn't have to take action by y'all, but in addition to training for the participants, we're going to have some training we develop for the staff liaisons that says like, oh, you've been promoted and you're in charge of a BAC. Here's what you need to know.
I like that.
That's fair.
Okay, so I'll have a note about adding some content to the application. So let's jump to the next question.
It's a no.
Should people be allowed to serve on more than one? So you all have actually already taken action on this in the rules and procedures of the mayor and commission. So Rule 32 says, no, really should just be on one. What we would recommend to you is that we update this policy manual to say that, because then that's adopted by the commission, maybe isn't as subject to change as rules of the mayor and commission. And then we would also suggest that while you have no control over those tier 3, those mayor appointments, what you could do is say, well, if you're on a mayor appointed committee, then you need to, resign or move off of a.
Like, I feel like it's helpful to have somebody who might be a planning commissioner on one of these mayor appointments. I mean, especially when you have, like, I'm thinking of the future land use plan that's going on now with this massive citizen committee, I think it's helpful to have one or two planning commissioners on that committee because they do understand the ins and outs of zoning and have some institutional knowledge of the procedures. So I feel like these tier three that do end up being kind of ad hoc and are created by the mayor to like kind of guide us through a specific process. I think that should be exempt, you know, and I think it is really important to have you have some experience on these standing committees on this.
I like diversity of thought where we have,
Mayor, man, a lot of times, those are based on something that's happening. Maybe what those performers need to look like is, they should have a time frame on. And say, we need a bucket of money again. And we want to put, they could be together. We want to spend that money. And we got 2 years to spend it.
Yeah.
That we meet, watch that committee, and after 2 years, that committee should be disbanded.
Yeah.
I don't think we do that.
Yeah, when we do a more temporary committees, you know, that might shuffle us through a certain planning
Yeah.
affordable housing plan or homelessness plan, you might have somebody who is on.
but should someone on the planning commission also be on the future land use? I would say no.
On the plan.
If someone on the planning commission, then the mayor is, and we have the future land use, the growth concept plan, should that person on the planning commission also serve on the growth concept? Say no. We need diversity.
Well, that's probably the problem. Each commission, don't each commission does five.
Yeah.
So want somebody.
What,
It's just an example though.
well, and so we would tell you that future land use or even SPLOST advisory, so the people that are helping to inform SPLOST are more or less a mayor's committee. Those are being appointed by the mayor. And so some of those are very large committees, right? And so I have a question, like if I'm a Greenway Commission member, and I want to be clear, like I wrote this and now I'm finding good reason to back away from it. If I'm a Greenway Commission member, should I be precluded from sitting on a T-SPLOST advisory committee? Well, if you go with that second bullet point, the answer would be yes. If you take no action on that second bullet point, the answer is it depends. Now, I would continue to tell you tier one and tier two, you shouldn't have dual representation on these standing BACs. And again, you've already kind of taken action on that in your rules. So that's the question before you is a little bit of like expertise and to your point, what should be more of a short duration topic specific appointment versus overrepresentation.
I mean, the tier three ones are not permanent standing committees that impact ordinances. You know, they tend to be very, you know, temporary advisory committees that are specific to a, you know, very specific task or process. And I feel like it's really important to have experts on those committees.
What about like meeting times? What if you have a tier three that's meeting at the same time as they are, you know?
I mean, we're on a bunch of different committees, I'll figure it out. It's not the most convenient time for me to have this meeting, but I make it happen.
So what do y'all think?
I think I don't think people should serve on more than one BAC, but I'm not opposed to them possibly serving on a mayor appointed board.
It seems like that's consensus.
Yeah. All right, let's hop to the next slide. Should ACP Gov employees be allowed to serve on BAC? So the manual speaks to this a little bit. So there's actually two where by ordinance they are, and I would argue they should. So the pension board and the deferred comp has an employee appointment. It's directly related to that. So you can, it's just getting representation, right? But then there's other places. So the manual says that you shouldn't serve as an employee, a full-time employee, where there's a direct relationship to the function of their daily position. But I'll tell you that those lines are very easy to blur. So if I am an employee who's active in transportation, and I'm also passionate about art, and I serve on ACAC. Well, what happens when ACAC is making decisions related to transportation projects and budgets? We would suggest to you that unless the enabling ordinance explicitly says an employee should serve, that employees, full-time employees should not serve or be appointed. However, hourly or no part-time, no benefit, full-time, no, there's very few full-time, no benefits, but in part-time folks, world's your oyster, right? If you want to be our parking deck attendant and be on the hearings board, knock yourself out. That's probably not going to be a real conflict of interest.
But them, thinking with employees, maybe at odds with the government.
Yeah, or
With them working with. And we had some employees that was on the human relations board. And after that person ended up being the chair. And she felt weird about stuff. And of course, she ended up resigning. I'm not gonna call her name, but and she just talked to me about it. And she ended up resigning from that post. So I think I agree with you. I think we should put employees in that. Although you may want to serve, I think it's a good thing to have an interest. I don't think we should put them in that position.
And I think places, boards and commissions and task forces where it's important to have employees on them, I think that they're worked into the committee, or should be worked into the committee. You have these specific employees that are,
And
they're
certainly,
constantly advising.
right, that ex officio role is prevalent in almost every BAC. It's just a matter of whether or not you vote, whether you're actively involved in the agenda. That's where things.
And I just use myself for the, I'm on peace now. I never say anything unless they ask me. I'm normally there to listen and so we're possibly back my colleague. I don't interact, I interject myself into that conversation unless they ask me a question.
So we will need to modify non-conforming enabling ordinances. Only just two, right? Just to hear.
So, I know the tree council specifies the forester as a voting member and secretary. So I think you might just change, that ordinance could be changed to,
Well, it's a lot of ex officio members.
it does have a lot of ex officios.
Don't necessarily make quorum very regularly because most of us are ex officios.
So we would just look and see if there's any places where we would advise you in the enabling ordinance. If it says that staff is like maybe lumped in with potential applicants and there's no obvious reason, then we would come back to the mayor and commission with ordinance edit.
Sounds good.
All right, next slide, I think is compensation.
Nope. Yeah. It's ordinances.
Oh, no, ordinances. So there are a few BACs, tier 2 again. We're not talking about necessarily, and they're all generally odd ducks, that there's just no ordinance. And we spoke about this a little bit just a moment ago with the land bank. So Athens in Motion was done by a resolution. The Vision Committee, who's been a long-standing committee in service of CDBG screening, has nothing that we can necessarily pin down. T-SPLOST and SPLOST oversight. So in most communities, that's not a citizen committee. That's actually a staff committee because there is a legal function saying whether or not something confirms or complies with the intent. But there's not usually a committee. So if your intent is to keep a standing committee there, it's probably best practice to have an ordinance just to empower them. And then the ARPA advisory committees, you could argue those are tier 3, tier 2, but since we've acknowledged them as tier 2 with agenda reports and CDOs, we would tell you that if you choose to sustain them, which we'll speak to that in a minute, that anything you want to sustain should probably have an ordinance.
Yes,
tier 2.
And I would say too, we may also consider some slight name changes because of, being a committee versus
A BA.
commission, like you did with Solid Waste Advisory Commission.
Yeah,
Right.
and that was a hard change. Solid Waste Advisory Committee, right? Solid Waste Advisory Commission. Great. But anyway,
So
go ahead. Sorry.
no concerns about any retained tier 2s. We'll bring forward an ordinance for, including Athens in Motion, which I think we can probably just take that resolution and frame it into an ordinance.
Y'all feel comfortable?
Okay, next slide. This might be, so stipends. There are 4 existing tier 2 that receive a stipend, although functionally, I believe, only really 2. So Construction Board of Appeals and Hearings Board each speak to a stipend. I don't know if they're being applied, and Construction Board of Appeals is kind of defunct anyhow. HRC and PSCOB do have stipends. That was an intentional action by more current mayor commission. So stipends are a push-pull kind of thing, you know, recognizing people's time, even something as simple as gas and a babysitter. But there is a cost financially to apply them, and then, of course, administratively, those liaisons have to put in requisitions into the system for folks. So a lot of this is up to you all. What we would say is it would make sense to have a unified policy, because I don't want to be serving on one BAC where I get a stipend and then maybe I volunteer and appointed to another and I don't, and that's just kind of a weird vibe. Similarly, if you apply them, we would recommend the language of per regularly scheduled meeting limited to no more than 1 a month. And it's just a housekeeping measure to make sure, well, if we had 4 meetings to discuss our upcoming annual report,
No,
you're good for 1 stipend, because that happened in October, right?
HRC will kill us right now.
So, and then, of course, we would say that's, you know, because there's other compensation involved, ACC Gov staff and commissioners, where they're used, we wouldn't recommend any stipend. Certainly no stipends to ex officios, since those ebb and flow. So the fundamental question here is, and then the fee schedule, even though it's not a fee, allows for the commission to adjust any stipends if you retain them as a part of the budget, right? So if it's set at $10 and you want to take it to 15, it just takes 1 change and not a change in every single ordinance. Fundamentally, though, the question before you is, how do you feel about stipends? And there's this handout I've given that shows this is under kind of a worst case scenario. All of these people, 12 meetings a month or 12 meetings a year, could cost as much as $79,500. Now, keep in mind that at least PSCOB and HRC
Are
already receiving stipends. There may be other opportunities to streamline this that y'all will be considering, but
So I feel like it's important to have stipends, especially on committees where it's important to have a diversity of members. Then PSCOB and HR and the Human Relations Commission, I think those qualify. I think it's also really helpful to have stipends on some of these CAD advisory committees, because you want citizens from those communities on those boards, and that's where you have.
So that's the question before. Do you
Yeah.
want
I mean, on
everybody?
T-SPLOST and SPLOST committees too, it would be helpful to have stipends there, because we have a hard time finding normal, regular citizens who live in those communities to serve on these boards, because it is a strain on their time and resources.
Commissioner Fisher?
If we keep all of them the way that it is now, would we be looking at the potential chance that we would have to shave the amount of members that serve on each one of these boards? Or is that goes back to policy? Like, does Athens in Motion need 9 members? You know, I don't want to take anybody off, it's just.
yeah, and then there's the weird one of like, Keep Athens-Clarke County Beautiful has a variable membership. It's the ordinance is between 8 and 20.
I mean, those are committees that I feel, you know, you have people who have clear interest in the topic itself, and you will always get people who want to be on those committees. But when you're talking about things where you need broad representation, I feel like that's, like, I don't think you necessarily need a stipend for Keep Athens-Clarke County Beautiful or Athens in Motion or the Planning Commission or the Hearings Board or anything like that. Most people who apply for these, we have no dearth of applicants for these. You know, people apply, they want to serve their community, they have specific interests in those areas. But these advisory boards that kind of go where you really need like representation from normal, regular, everyday folks within that community, I feel like that's where we can use stipends to help assure that we're getting that representation and that people are being compensated for their time and are able to pay a babysitter.
Is there a legal ramification around it?
Yeah. Good question.
You know, I don't know that anyone would ever allege it, but I think there's something to be said for a fairness and equity piece of why, I mean, Hearings Board currently has a $10 stipend? Why does the hearings board get that, but the planning commission doesn't? I will say that, like, for instance, the planning commission specifically says by ordinance, they shall not receive compensation. Now, I will point out as a caveat, not to throw a fly in the ointment, a lot of these ordinances say you won't receive compensation, but it does say you can be reimbursed for actual expenses incurred in the performance of their duties. Now, I don't know that that means daycare, or early childcare for you to attend a meeting, but that is another possibility to say, look, we're not gonna provide a stipend, but we'll have a robust process for which you could actually get reimbursement for expenses. I just don't know that anybody uses that.
We it's mileage, maybe tax appeal,
Right, that would be an argument, is that an expense incurred in the performance of their duties?
maybe mileage, it could be a part. These committees that own.
I think my question got kind of construed, because I'm saying, who can we not pay and who should we?
There's no guidance, that's what I'm saying. I think there's a strong argument that if you want to do the safest thing, you either pay everybody or pay no one.
Nobody.
I will also say too that, with the size of the community and that stipend for gas, it's, I think, 56 cents
Right.
a mile now. And so for a lot of people, it might be $1 here at home.
Right.
And then you have more time sort of spent with the process of it, with doing it.
Well,
I would also say too, real quick, if there are some, to your point about the number of membership, certainly you could change some of those with some of the aspects of it. So, I mean, there's a few outliers certainly that are larger than others. Some have even numbers, which potentially can be challenging to go. But that'd be kind of up to you, but we have a recommendation on that.
I
So,
was gonna bring that up at the end of the meeting, but,
And it could be that you want to take no action on this till you go through a discussion about what you're doing with tier two BACs, because there is a budget implication. The last thing I will leave you with, a little bit to your point on mileage or even an actual cost, what the ordinance says. Administratively, that's a goat show, and yes, that's an official term for this committee. And then now as the liaison, I've got to figure out what Sarah's mileage was, how I'm gonna document it, put it into the system. It's a lot easier for me to just take an attendance thing and say, here's who was in attendance, cut the check.
I would definitely go for that. I just want to know who to get in there, who would.
Yeah.
Because everybody, that's right.
So share, we need to be consistent that we're gonna, I look at their budget implications, but so we ask the people. I think we should, I think I look up, we owe them.
Right.
It's 25.
And actually, I should say one really quick thing I forgot. I think there are a few that have a state law mandate where the state law says they should not be compensated. Obviously, we couldn't do anything about that, but anywhere where it's optional, I would say we should be consistent.
Can we get a list of who by state law?
Yeah, I could certainly check on that. I think it's only like one or two, but I do remember that might even be like tax assessors or something, but there is a body, I know that it says that.
And can we also, get the ramification of shaving some members, like how many do we need for a vote? And if that's the case, then the rest of them will be ex officio, and then we'll have to worry about paying them. And I know this is live, I'm not trying not to pay nobody, I'm just saying.
No, there's virtually no ramifications in terms of numbers. I think
Oh, okay,
you could change them to pretty much anything that you want, except for like possibly like planning commission, like some of those bodies may have a set number, but virtually everything else you could change.
okay.
And so Sherry, again, we've talked around tier two. Is it, in your opinion, defensible to say, okay, well, we compensate tier two with a stipend of X per our policy manual. We don't compensate tier one because they're just like, we're not in control of the hospital authority or the classic center authority. Like that's up to their own prerogative.
I think that's a distinguishing thing. And I think you could even argue, I mean, from up to the mayor, but we don't compensate committees or task force because they're maybe limited in scope or they don't require the training and commitment that maybe certain entities require.
So I think what we can do is as we go through a future exercise to talk about scope of BACs, how many you want to continue with. we can bring this issue back before you and you can just decide if you'd like to have a unified approach to tier 2 stipends. Let's go to the next slide.
Andrew, question, if you do these stipends, that would be part of FY 26 budget consideration, right?
Correct.
Yes.
Yes. So we would not recommend you apply them right away. Thank you, Ms. Jean. And I know we're grinding through this. Hopefully we're in the home stretch. So process for removal. This is largely unaddressed. Sometimes it's covered in ordinances, sometimes it's not. The fundamental question before you is 4 things that might need removal: attendance, training we talked about, relocation, just simply moving out of a county. Do you prefer to have those, an opportunity for those to be automated? So if I move for Fulton County, like my time as a member of a BAC should be ended. But procedurally, would that require a mayor and commission vote as it exists now? I think the answer is it depends. So what we would say is if there's anything you want to automate around, especially kind of those top 3, we would have an appeals. We would recommend an appeals process no matter what. So if it's like, no, my spouse moved to Fulton County, I actually am renting this house over here, just a misunderstanding, like, we go through that.
Automated.
Okay.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, especially, this is pretty clear.
And then as conflict of interest, it would be either or. So if the mayor and commission feels like, or it can be more than conflict of interest, but if the mayor and commission feels like a member needs to be removed, they have that prerogative to take it up, so long as the mayor can put it on the agenda and have that vote. Whereas also it would say a majority vote of a BAC. So if they're like, hey, Andrew's just being disruptive, he's not actually helping us work through this, we recommend his removal, well, then that would come to you all as well. But it would still require a vote under that approach.
Okay, the only question I had was who would be the appeals body?
You all would be,
Or the mayor commission?
it would have to be, I mean, I guess unless you, I think realistically you would have to be.
All right, last slide, I hope.
No.
No. This is your candidate. All right, how about this? If we gotta, yeah, we're actually at the end of our time. So is it all right with you, Chair, if we jump to the very last slide, which talks about some homework? So we're gonna skip this for a minute. Jeff can tell me he told you so. Oh, no, sorry. So this list, the extent of VACs. There is some stale activity on the list. There is some duplicative activity. So the question before you is, do you want to do any streamlining recommendations to your peers on this? If you are, what we would do is we would send you kind of a survey of each one and get your feedback of, I like it exactly how it is. I'd be open to combining it. Maybe I'd combine it with this one, or I don't know why we have this. I think it should be discontinued. If you're going to go down that road, a few things to advise or just educate you on. So the Construction Board of Appeals is a state mandated appeal mechanism, but we can defer that to DCA, and they have not considered an appeal in 25 years. So we have this whole ordinance on our books for something that just doesn't happen. And so we could just make our ordinance say, you need to appeal, go to DCA. ARPA is basically discontinued, so I think that's some housekeeping you all could take. TAD Advisory Committee, so there's 6, and that's helpful in the development of those recommendation resource allocation plans. But as those plans are adopted, you may want to consider moving to one committee just for a management of that.
I would like.
Except with the mall though, they have a contract with the school board.
Well, there's the mall oversight, which is separate.
So each of those TAG committees, as projects move forward that might want to utilize the TAG money, they'll need the input of those committees.
This is true as
But
it
it's
is
not very
set up today.
Meet regularly at all, it's just as needed.
Well, and even in their phase of planning and coming to you all with the recommendations, we're having a hard time getting quorums. It's a total of 40 something people. I would think that if you had these standing little groups to get the plan on record, to say, this is how we recommend you spend the funds, then what you might be able to do is have one committee with representation from each TAD, either a business or a resident.
Okay.
Let me show them time. I, revolutionary. I spoke with our Saunders this weekend about, but we'll have that, I'll discuss that at the next meeting about eliminating or combining most of these. Yeah, but I don't wanna, start that fire right now.
So y'all are okay if we send you kind of an online thing where you'll just give input on each one of those? And then if there's a note, we'll work with the attorney's office. So if any of them are legally mandated, like the planning commission, we'll make a note and we will actually not give you an option. We'll just say, it's gotta stay, but you can take it to 9 years or whatever.
Okay.
All righty, motion to adjourn. Jeff, I'm sorry.
You straight?
Yeah.
Oh, you straight?
We'll touch on a few other housekeeping items in our next meeting.
All this stuff emailed to us.
Yes.
Yeah, and y'all must be here, man. Get that back.
Yeah, so no BAC that 18.
No VACs on the 18th?
Yeah.
Don't be that, I'm well.
Yeah, would y'all like to meet at 12?
Let's want to come for you.
12
Yeah,
better.
2. I thought said you were gonna be 2. Just text message.
Yeah, I met at 12, but I.
12 time. 12.
So 12 to 1:30?
Yeah.
On the 11th?
From here on,
18.
yeah, 18.
18th? Oh, we're doing it the third.
About
We're doing it the
just the
third.
land bank
Didn't we
or?
used to do it the second?
Never did second. It's always the third.
I think this be land make sure.
Meetings get so.
All right.
But I will be talking to y'all about some of these BAC bills.
Me too.
I thought-
Cause we got, motion to adjourn. Before I say this, I'll,
Second.
all in favor, say aye.
Aye.